Welcome back to another episode of Triumph Over Tragedy. If you're a loyal listener, you know that what we try to do is be extremely transparent about the tragedy, but more focus on the triumph, more focus on the positive outcome, the things that help other people, the things that help ourselves. This podcast is just about being extremely real. Like I needed to clear my throat real. And I want to say that my next guest is an award-winning author, and before I introduce her, I just want to say that I believe that whenever something good is going to happen, whenever there is going to be a breakthrough in something or whatever the case is, that there's going to a light's going to shine on the bad. Something goes wrong. There's resistance. Something is just holding things back, and this podcast is one of those things. Right down to this introduction, I just found out just hours ago that we needed to get the introduction to the producer, and well, I sent it to the producer and he didn't receive it. So there's just been a lot of different and weird things that have happened, a slow resistance, so to speak, to get this out. But anyway, Katrina Shawver, she wrote this book, A Polish Swimmer's True Story of Friendship from Auschwitz to America. Henry. Pretty amazing story. I'm most of the way through the book, and when I did the podcast, I was probably about a third of the way through the book, and a very powerful story from the Polish side of things about the Holocaust. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome my next guest, Katrina Shawver. Good morning.
Hey, Matt. Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing great.
It's freezing here.
Welcome to Phoenix.
Wow. I was like, I'm glad I packed, a pair of jeans and a coat and things like that.
That is Phoenix. The weather will change 30 degrees overnight, and now summer is gone.
Right. Is it really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Once it dropped
to, yes. Thank God. When you live in Phoenix, I am a shade seeker.
Sure.
Other people look for beaches and sun. When you live in the desert and you're fair skinned, you look for shade.
Right.
And you are basically baked in for about 7 months of the year. It's too hot to go out.
Okay.
So this is like refreshing and wonderful.
Nice.
When you live here.
We're called snowbirds where I'm from, right? So we get away from the snow. We go to Florida and we come to Phoenix and all those things and just get away from it. What do they call people from Phoenix that go up north in the summertime? Is there, do you know? I have no idea.
I don't either.
That seems like something that would be kind of likely.
Oh, yeah. If you have a place, if you go up there, the traffic on a 3-day weekend, you just don't want to get there.
Yeah.
Heading up north.
Yeah.
I don't know what you call them.
Yeah. There's got to be, that'd be kind of fun. We should maybe make something up. We'll think about that over the next hour or so and come up with something, right?
Yeah. But snowbirds, right about now, the traffic increases. You start seeing more out-of-state license plates. You bet.
Wow.
Especially come November.
Sure.
Because you hit that 6-month mark of people's summer here, winter here.
Sure.
Summer elsewhere.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Grow up in this area?
I have lived here since I was 10.
Okay.
I moved out from Philadelphia right before my 10th birthday because my father got transferred.
Okay.
As an engineer, and then you get settled in a place. He didn't want to move back east.
Yeah.
Went to college down in Tucson, University of Arizona.
Sure.
So then you have your friends. Then you get a job working for the state. Then you meet your husband. Then you have kids and you have grandparents nearby. And here I am.
Right. I blame my parents for me living in Minnesota. Sorry, Mom and Dad. They already know that.
Yeah.
Right. You're born and raised in an area, or in your case, you were very young, and then your dad didn't want to move, and that makes total sense. And I don't like the snow. I've tried to like it, especially when I was younger. I skied and snowmobiled, and sure, you have fun, but there's like 98% of the other time that it's terrible. You're constantly shoveling, you're constantly plowing, you're constantly snowblowing, and you're always cold.
Did I read you're from Minnesota?
Yes.
So you're talking the extreme opposite.
Total.
Of Phoenix. You're not just slightly opposite. You are extreme.
Yes.
Opposite.
Yes, extreme. I'm going to use that from now on.
The extreme
opposite.
Yes, from Sun States, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is a little bit different so my intention of this podcast was to share other people's stories, which we're going to do, but it's not your personal story. And that was my intent. But and I was telling you this off camera, I think that it was really important to me to reach out to you because this is a very unique story. And we're gonna be talking about some Hitler stuff today.
Okay.
And not particularly, but that's really why we're here, is because of the evil that whole, anyway. But you shared a different side of that. And that is the side of?
Poland.
Right.
And Poland during World War II. I find that history is taught from the perspective of the country you're in.
Okay.
World War II history in this country is based on wherever our military went and died.
Sure.
U.S. military didn't die in Poland.
Right.
Or get, sent to Russia. If you learn World War II history in England, you're going to learn about the bombing of London. You're going to learn about Dunkirk. Polish history will know what's going on. And when I met this gentleman, Henry Zguda.
Why don't you introduce us to Henry?
Henry Zguda, I met totally random on a phone tip. There was no reason for us to meet.
Sure.
And this is where life has a way of kind of interjecting something. I wrote for the newspaper, and I got a phone tip about this gentleman that I should write about. I knew 3 things. He was Polish. He had survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald, and he said he went to high school with the Pope, who at that time was Pope John Paul.
Okay.
Was I interested? Yeah. So I called him up. I never even got him on the phone. His wife in this thick Bronx accent. Doll, I will make sure he talks to you. We had an interview, and he was likable. The first thing I walked in, I went to shake hands. No, he lifted my hand like a European and kissed it.
Is that right?
So I already knew this gentleman was different.
Yeah.
And I knew enough in that first interview, it stayed with me. And I went home and talked to my girlfriend, and I met this most interesting guy, and he has no children, and he has no, relatives. His father died right after World War I.
Wow.
So if you know about any history about Europe after World War I, hundreds of thousands of men died. So you have a whole lot of fatherless children and widows, and that's where his mom was. And she never remarried, good Catholic mom. And he had told his wife to throw everything out because no one cared.
Wow.
I didn't even know what he had. I didn't understand the scope. This was pure instinct, Matt, which sometimes when you learn to follow your gut, things pay off. And it was just this gut reaction. And I called him up and said, Henry, you want to write a book? And he was, okay. And I bought a tape recorder. This is 2002.
Okay.
I don't have a lot of photos because we're not walking around with smartphones.
Yes.
Right? I don't think we even owned a video camera. And we started.
Wow.
And we clicked. I wouldn't have spent this much time with someone I didn't like.
Right.
And
and if I could just say too, you talk about Nancy a bit, and unfortunately I didn't get through the book as far as I had hoped, and we talked about that already. But I did get through quite a bit of it and read several different paragraphs throughout it. But Nancy sounds like a very unique person as well, and it sounds like it was you were like let into the family.
I was. It was a connection, and Henry and I interviewed twice a week for almost 6 months. And I got a lot of his story. I have a whole shoebox mat of cassette tapes that I worked very hard to transcribe. This project just grew and grew in scope. It became, what did I take on?
Okay.
What was I thinking?
Sure.
It became harder than I wasn't pulling it off. What caught me off guard was Henry passed away a year after we met. And so the story I have is what I have. And at that point, I didn't know what to do, except that I was close enough to his widow. I went over, ran to her house, and we just sort of cried together. I knew her husband better than anyone else because he entrusted me with stories he hadn't even told her.
Was that right?
Yeah, he knew she would get thoroughly upset. They had been married 42 years. And we developed this kinship. In fact, I brought a couple pictures of me and Nancy.
Okay.
I had to.
Make sure, put that so the camera here can see it.
Okay. So Nancy and I.
So go ahead and right at yours. Yeah, right
there
at the one
go.
at you. Yeah.
Nancy and I clicked, and she was in her 80s. I actually ended up becoming protective because she didn't have relatives. I discovered some nieces later on.
Okay.
But none were really close. Most were out of town. And we just had this kinship. I could talk about anything, always over a glass of wine.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
I know. Nancy was Italian. You didn't get in the house without being handed something. You didn't get out of the house without being handed food.
Okay.
Just this lovely Italian woman. And so my friend Pam, who talked me into this, we became friends. So there is Nancy there.
Yeah.
She lived for 10 more years.
Okay.
And so she kind of, the last 2 years, she sank into dementia.
Sure.
And so this picture is my last picture with Nancy. She was 90 years old. I would bring her to my house. And, I knew how much they were in love. Nancy adored Henry. Henry adored Nancy. When they met, Henry had defected to this country from communist Poland.
Sure.
And that story comes at the end. There was still a warrant on his head. When you defect and you are someone of significance, there's an arrest warrant on your head. They married a year later.
Okay. So essentially he had asylum, is what you're saying. Like he was wanted by the Communist Party in Poland.
Yes. He was up there, which, again, Henry always said, I'm nobody special.
Yeah.
I was lucky.
Which makes him extremely special.
Yeah. Yeah. You get a feel for why he met people throughout his life.
Yeah.
The movie Forrest Gump came out. I felt like I was talking with a real life Forrest Gump. As you get through that book, Matt, the right people continue to come into his life at the right time.
Yeah.
And sometimes we would talk and my mouth would just sort of drop open and I'd kind of prop it up. And there had to be this balance between his telling his story and my stopping him to spell out complicated Polish names versus letting him just talk.
Okay.
I was not a formal interviewer. We chatted. I didn't know what he had, so I let him talk. And that is where we got so many good stories. Henry had a certain logic. One of my favorite stories, and you might have gotten to this, we walked in one day and he's like, you know what I don't get about this country? I'm like, what? All day long, there are ads for weight loss on TV.
I did.
Yes, he's like, that's so stupid. If you want to lose weight, stop eating.
Right.
Now, people in our country...
Common sense at its finest, right?
Well, I think that happens in a land of abundance.
Okay.
When you grow up in Europe after the war, food was precious. During World War II,
I suppose you don't think about that, really. Food was obviously precious in the prisons, but talk about that a little bit.
Well, Henry's entire life, his mother was struggling to work.
Okay.
Sauerkraut, cabbage, beetroots, macaroni. It was nothing fancy. Occasionally they'd have meat. I went to Poland in 2013. I always knew I couldn't finish this without going to Poland and being authentic. And that was 10 years after he passed away that circumstances came. I remember on the Polish menu, it said salad bar. I was like, great, something besides, cabbage and, this heavy mushroom sauce. Matt, it was 3 flavors of sauerkraut and beets.
You're kidding.
No. I saw pickle, I saw cucumber on a menu. It was pickles. Okay.
Really?
Yeah, that's salad over there. So you're talking a whole different culture because it's
Still.
It's a
2013.
Well, it's a northern climate.
Okay.
You have to go
right.
with what grows, just as in Russia. You've got to have these root vegetables that stand out. Now, in the bigger cities, Krakow and Warsaw, no, they're university towns. They're very cosmopolitan. You're going to get anything. But traditional Polish food, it's what's available at the time.
Wow. In reading what I've gotten to so far, I want to go to Poland. My wife and I love to travel, and we've been several places overseas. And how easy was it to travel in Poland?
I would say I lucked out and met someone who runs pilgrimages to Krakow, because that is where Pope John Paul, at that point, Karol Wojtyla, was from. And he helped me get connected with the right interpreter, know where to stay. Without that, it would not have been a quality visit. Now, I will say I could be a tourist ad for Poland because they are not on the euro. They are still on the Polish zloty, that currency. And so it costs less than half to visit Poland than almost any other country there.
Really?
And everyone speaks English. Even in the museums, kind of like here, especially in the Southwest, all the signage is bilingual English and Spanish. Over there, it's bilingual Polish and English.
Okay.
And in Europe, English is the universal language. We would go on tours, and the guide would be in English, and then at a break, you'd hear Norwegian and Swedish and German and French, but everyone knew English. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
So,
when I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, I gave you a summary of kind of what I went through and how this path started for me and things. And, as I was reading the very beginning of it, I was like, wow, I have gone through nothing, and I've read some other personal stories of people, obviously from the Jewish perspective. And this really struck me differently. I'm not sure why exactly. I'm still processing that. But, he talked about how he was arrested. These were his words that you wrote.
yes.
And how he was arrested and stuff. And when he first went to prison and the person that, escaped. And then tell us that story of how he got caught, essentially, and why he went to prison. I thought that was very interesting.
I'm going to backtrack just a little bit
perfect.
to kind of explain the context of this book.
Yeah.
And the context of this book is Henry was Polish. I probably could spell Poland when we met. I really didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
Henry was an athlete. He had been a street kid. He joined the YMCA in Krakow, which had the most modern swim pool in all of Poland, because the YMCA movement was spreading across Europe.
Okay.
To kind of help rebuild countries after the war. It was an American. In Krakow, Poland, they built the most modern swimming pool, indoor swimming pool at that YMCA.
Wow.
Henry was an athlete. He was there for football, soccer,
Okay.
volleyball. And one day they posted a sign that said, if you join the swim team, your dues are waived.
Is that right?
Yeah. So Henry's like, that began my career as a swimmer.
Because it was free.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
He knew how to swim, obviously.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the pictures in there's very skinny guys in bathing suits, but he learned to swim.
Okay.
At a time when that sport was really very new.
Yeah.
Older pools, and he was pretty athletic. So he was a swimmer, and he eventually began competing, traveling around the country, and as they built more pools,
Yeah.
in the main city, so he knew a lot of people.
Yeah.
Just as someone in sports. So I had to ask him the same question. When I met him, there was one question I was asked repeatedly over and over, 100%. Well, if he wasn't Jewish, why was he arrested?
Yeah.
Well, if he wasn't Jewish, why was he in Auschwitz? The only woman who didn't say that was someone who said he was arrested. He must have been important. And she was Polish.
Is that right?
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Right. So the history of Europe is Poland is centrally located, even though we think of it as behind the Iron Curtain.
So explain that to me so I understand it, though. So if he was important in Poland, if you were important in Poland, you were arrested, essentially.
Let's say you want to conquer a country. Okay. Poland has been squeezed between Germany and Russia for centuries.
Yes.
Poland had not been a country after World War I. Germany lost land to Poland. Germans never forgot that. Germans have never liked Poles. They were always subjugated to the great German people. So let's say you want to invade a country, and this would be true any place. What's the first thing you would do, Matt?
Yeah.
No,
right.
I'm asking you. What would you do?
Well, I don't think that way, but I think just out of a gut reaction would be, you kind of make sure that you take back what you thought was yours first, and you're going to make sure that anybody that would have kind of the intelligence and possibly the know-how or the connections to create a movement, you would get rid of them.
Bingo. You arrest and kill the leaders.
Yeah.
A month after...
Whether he was a political leader or not, that makes total sense. Thanks for making me think through that.
He was a young, healthy guy.
Yeah.
And he lasted till 1942. He had good German papers, but, the Germans came in. Poles were referred to as Untermenschen, subhuman. And
which is what Hitler was really after. I mean, the Jews were obviously in genocide and things, and I don't want to really discuss that. That's a very terrible thing. We're talking about triumph, but I think we have to understand that the Nazis and what Hitler was after was actually just exactly what you said, a dominant race, and that he thought that theirs was it, and a master race and all those things. So anybody beneath them, get rid of them.
Yeah, and it's actually more complex than that. As I learned more about Poland and what Henry had been through, Matt, this became more than one man's story.
Sure.
My sense of fairness became more bothered when I realized how much Poland had been through, how little credit they had, and basically what a disadvantage they were then and after the war. It just rankled me. Why don't we know this?
Yeah.
There are 5,000 Holocaust memoirs out there. There has been Holocaust education for 3 generations since Yad Vashem in Israel began it in the 60s. And that made this story important to me.
It makes me, I'm sorry to interrupt, it makes me extremely sad, angry, disgusted when people say, that's propaganda. I mean, still people today, and obviously we're talking about particular countries, but still countries and people today say it didn't happen and all these things is propaganda and blah, blah, blah. How does that, getting into this, how does that make you feel when you hear things like that? I
have one word.
Yeah.
It comes from anti-Semitism and hate.
Sure.
If you can deny it, belittle it. First of all, that eliminates some of the blame and harshness of the crime. It's always anti-Semitic. I am not Catholic, I am not Jewish, and I am not Polish.
Yeah.
And I was kind of intimidated by that. Like, who am I to write this?
Yeah.
And there's been an interesting dynamic once it's come out that I've heard again and again, is the Polish community respects me because I didn't have to write it. And no one talks nicely of Poland if they're not Polish. By the same token, some of the reviews came through that I'm not writing with an agenda. I wrote to tell a story and to be fact-based. So I'm not writing about my grandfather. And so I find I've been welcomed into Jewish communities because this book is a witness. Henry saw a lot.
Right,
it is a witness. This did happen.
Right.
So
to follow down where you said, though, if they deny it and things like that, basically what I hear you saying in that statement is then they can do what they want to do. right? If they can deny that evil happened, what does that give them license to do to maybe their people or other people? Does that make sense? That's kind of what I heard you say right there at the beginning.
Part of what was going on in Europe was the issue of Jews and anti-Semitism. And so I had to go back and learn some of the history of Germany to understand World War II.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism has been with us for centuries. In Germany, and I'm actually doing a presentation on this soon.
If you look at the Bible and the history as as a piece of history, even not as anything other than that, and we're not going to get into my beliefs because I believe the Bible, but what I'm saying is, and where I'm going is right from the beginning. That's centuries. I mean, really from the beginning, there's been anti-Semitism.
Exactly. So to put this in context, I'm going to go back to 1932 Germany, and I'll do this very quickly. There was an election. There were three parties. Hitler never got the majority.
Right.
He got 37%. Coming in third were the German communists. So let me ask you, do you know when the concentration camps were first created, and do you know who was first arrested?
I don't.
1933, March 1933, within 2 months of Hitler rising to power, he developed these protective custody camps and he arrested his political enemies, the communists, because then he could dominate, he could silence them.
Yep.
The next party I learned, I didn't understand, Henry referred to them as the Bibelforschers. Now, Henry had a lot of terms he used in German and Polish, and I had to kind of fumble my way through.
Yeah.
And I was like, Bibelforschers. He's like, yeah, not Catholic. We finally figured out Bibelforschers, Bible researchers, Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
Jehovah's Witnesses were Christian, and their belief in God meant they would not salute Hitler, and they would not enroll their children in Hitler Youth or the army. So they became enemies of the Reich. They were the only party that people were arrested for their belief system. And they were the only population of the camps that all they had to do was sign a paper, signing away their God, and they'd be released. And maybe one or two did. And while they were a very small percentage of the Germans, you begin to see Jews came much later. The history began in 1933. There were some German communists who were imprisoned for 11 years. 1933 to 1944, 12 years.
Yeah.
It's all this history. So you begin to realize this started with enemies of the Reich and enemies of Hitler.
Okay, so it was simply an enemy thing for him, not necessarily. It didn't start out as a Jewish thing then? Is that what you're saying?
Well, 2 weeks later, after Dachau opened, north of Munich, that was the first one, the racial laws began in April. So it was a slower noose around the Jews. They became, everyone needs a scapegoat. I'm very nervous in our current situation because now it's, the immigrants. Now it's the Muslims. Now it's the Jews. And I hate to see that conversation because that's exactly what was going on then. And become a scapegoat, make Germany great again, which it was so disadvantaged after World War I. It really was.
So you're saying, like, from the top leadership of our country that you're concerned about it? Is that what you mean, or where's your concern?
I'm not going into politics. I think if you learn,
and I guess I didn't mean, but obviously you kind of brought it up.
Well,
so
I bring it up to put things in perspective that no one was safe from Hitler. That's one of the messages of this book. Is Hitler went after a lot of people.
Yeah.
Communists, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, gypsies. But again, communists and anti-socials were anyone who didn't go along with Hitler, who talked about him. Jews began getting arrested later. The real devastation, and there was a category of concentration camps, better, worse, and death camps. Those didn't come till 1942. And they were mostly built in Poland, not because Poland accommodated them. The Germans were very frugal organized, efficient.
Yeah.
Poland historically had 80% of the world's Jewish population because Poland historically had been welcome
Okay.
for centuries to the Jewish population, where they had been chased out of Italy and Germany and Spain. So I like to say Hitler got 2 for 1 when he invaded Poland. He wanted the land back. He wanted to subjugate Poles and Jews.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Poland lost 6 million people during World War II, 3 million Catholic, Christian, and 3 million Jewish. And it really got to me, why don't we hear about that other 3 million? Why?
Right.
I don't have an answer for it, but that's why I wanted this story out there.
But you don't think it's on purpose?
I think it's circumstances. One is Polish history is not as important to us because it isn't our history.
Well, and as you said earlier, because our soldiers didn't die there?
Right. The U.S., Britain, and France never went to the aid of Poland. Poland helped them and got very little thanks. There's 2 more things. During World War II, the 3 main allies were Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, and Roosevelt. Well, Stalin was an ally of the U.S. and Britain. And after the war, Poland fell under Stalin. So you came under communism until 1989. So Poland lost the war, even after fighting. Well, books that were written after the war, they weren't published unless they glorified the communist liberators.
Okay.
So you have another suppression of all of these Polish stories
Sure.
that never got out. And there probably were, but they're not in English. So 3 qualities, 1, being under communism, 2, Stalin being an ally. And the other is
Obviously,
how history
initially
is taught.
being an ally, at this time.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that time frame you're talking about.
So understanding this history, and there was a real balance in putting this book together, because for me to understand Henry, I had to understand the context of the world, of Europe, of Poland, and what was going on. So I had to include some history, because if I didn't know it, the reader didn't know it.
Yeah.
And you had to understand the magnitude. But it's not a textbook. It's just enough to let you understand what was going on. To every person, even Poles, I still get those comments, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I found the storytelling very interesting because there's so much power in storytelling, right? And especially if it's fact stories and things like that, if you're interested in history and all those things, when someone can come in and share really their life experiences and give the kind of detail that Henry was able to give, that's great storytelling. Not just in the sense that, wow, this is a great made-up Star Wars story, right? This is factual stuff, and the way he described it was remarkable.
He had some great quotes. I remember one in the camp. He said, there were lots of languages in those camps, but really there was only one. A punch in the face. Pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Pretty accurate. He was a good storyteller, but I also have always read nonfiction, biographies. People fascinate me.
Yeah.
In fact, when I wrote for the newspaper, which again I got by writing a letter to the editor, offering to write for them, and they said, okay.
When was that?
1997.
Okay.
And I did that for 11 years till they downsized.
Fun. Yeah.
And so it gave me a reason to get out and meet people. And I met some of the most interesting people. Meeting Henry, of course, changed the direction of my life.
For sure.
But yeah.
How could it not, in even a personal sense, not change the direction?
And I think about this. If you look at the word history and break it apart, it's his story.
Yes, that's great.
And I found another quote that I love and I put in the front of the book. And I truly, passionately believe this. The past actually happened, but history is only what someone wrote down.
Yeah.
So this is my contribution to the literature of the time, that the story of Poles are out there, that Henry's story is not lost.
Yeah. Tell me about how he was arrested.
It was, I believe, May 30, 1942.
That's some really good detail. Wow, I wasn't expecting a date. That's You really are, your memory's phenomenal.
I had to learn a lot. There's a high burden of proof on a book like this.
Sure.
Even fiction should get the facts right. And I can tell you a lot of World War II fiction does not get the facts right. But I wanted credibility. If it was going to have...
This is going to be fun for the podcast. So we're in a hotel meeting room, and right outside of our door, I'm sure we're not going to be able to edit that out. There's just a crash of some sort of cart.
Well, because you don't
Sorry
see
for the interruption.
No, because you can't see the door. What you don't understand is someone opened it, and it's opened by about 6 inches.
Is it? Okay, sure.
It is. Well, I don't know if you want to close it, but we'll run with it.
Like I said before, this it's not polished and perfect, and it doesn't need to be. And this is real life stuff, and there's real life stuff happening around us.
Yeah.
So we'll keep going.
So back to the night. It was about 8 o'clock at night, and Henry was running because he had heard they were arresting young boys, and they were arresting YMCA. So he was trying to get home.
So in May of 42, he'd be how old?
25.
Okay.
He was born in 1917.
Okay.
And so he got caught on a street by himself, and along comes a truck, and there's the SS in front of him with their guns, and they saw him, and he's like, he can't run and hide, so he turned around to face them, and they're like, are you Deutscher? Meaning German. There were still German sympathizers living in Poland. Okay. Were you Deutscher? No. Were you Jewish? No. Polish? Yes. But he actually said Old Deutscher, meaning old German.
Oh, okay.
Trying to kind of make a joke, and he had German didn't matter. As he said, they kicked him in the ass, threw him in the truck, and when you open up the flap, there's the rest of the basketball team from the YMCA. So he got in the back of the truck. They didn't know what was going on. They were swallowing papers. They ended up at Montelupe prison.
They were swallowing papers?
Well,
I did read that, but explain that.
Well, anyone who's arrested, you could get strip searched, whatever. They're going to look for papers if they have phone numbers, whatever. It's like someone being arrested. You swallow.
So they were hiding their friends.
Well, they're hiding any evidence they might have.
Sure.
You don't know where you're going. You're in a truck. Germans are occupying. It's not good.
We don't get that, though, do we?
Here's the other thing for Americans. We are bordered by the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. We have never been invaded. So we don't know what it is to live as an occupied country.
Right.
People in Europe have lived in an occupied country, and there's a very big difference because you're subjugated to whoever is there. In fact, in Poland, this is really significant because that was the highest penalty for helping a Jew in Poland.
Really?
Only in Poland. If you helped a Jew, it was death not only for you, but your entire family. And usually they would massacre the family in front of you first. So I like to say, I have a hard time with people that go back and judge history 3 generations later, because you don't know what it's like to be occupied. You don't know what it is to have your whole family at risk. And if you've been evicted from your home, are you in a position to save other people? Or do you just need to survive? So that was the condition, and he was interrogated, pretty much beaten. And again, I'm not going to give away the whole story. There were not as many people who were arrested as made it through 2 weeks. So Henry had this most interesting logic that always got to me, or just amazed me. So he's like, one morning they were called out to dress. I think this was June 14th, so he'd been in there 2 weeks. Yeah, I know my facts.
That's right. I'm sorry, Katrina. I'm thinking like, wow, I wish I could remember things like that specific.
Oh, yeah. No, I do. It's part of the story.
Yeah.
And that helped me out later down the road. And they were put in a truck, and the flaps were down. And, they'd kind of peek out. They kind of knew where they were going. They knew they were heading west, but didn't know where. And he came to this place and kind of peeked out the flaps, and he saw some friends he knew, and he came under this gate that said Arbeit macht frei, which is very famous now. Work shall set you free. That phrase actually goes back to 1933 Dachau.
Is that right?
Yeah, that was not created for Auschwitz. That was a German precedent for 1933.
What was the name of the first prison he went to?
Montelupe.
Okay. Is that still, does that exist today?
Yes.
Did you get to visit there?
You know, my interpreter asked me if I wanted to go inside, and I said no when I was there. But later, I took pictures of it. My husband's like, what are you doing? You don't take pictures of a prison when cameras are trained on you. Yes, it was an Austrian prison built in the 1800s. During World War II, the Germans took it over. During communism, the Soviets took it over. And now it's just a city prison. Yes, it is absolutely still there. But here was Henry's reaction. He knew high school German.
It's still a prison, you said? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah.
Still today?
Yeah, it's still a prison.
You're kidding.
Wow. Yeah.
It's hard for me to wrap my mind around that. I've been to China, and obviously that's extremely old, and saw at the Great Wall and all kinds of old things. But to think of something that's a prison still hundreds of years later,
from the 1800s,
couple hundreds of years later.
Every city has a jail. Every city has crime. Why not reuse what's already built?
It was built in the
1800s when Austria.
Was built in the Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
When Poland was under Austria, which is a whole nother piece of history.
Sure.
Henry's reaction going under this bridge was he sighed a sigh of relief. He'd always been a hard worker.
Yeah,
how bad could it be?
Wow.
The history of Auschwitz is, it opened in 1940. In the first 2 years, it was almost all Poles, political prisoners. The prisons were overflowing. Auschwitz was a huge piece of land outside a small town. They cleared a lot of property. They evicted Polish families. It was secret. People did not know this place existed. They actually had spies sneaking in to know what was going on. So Henry knew nothing about this place. Townspeople didn't know about it. You have to understand now, everyone knows the word Auschwitz. It's the most recognizable. Would you believe there were actually, during World War II, 44,000 places of detention that the Germans set up?
No. I had no idea there was that many.
Yeah. Let me go back to Germany in 1933, because you have to understand the scope of Hitler and what was going on. By the end of 1933, and again, I'm a history geek, but it helps set the background, there were more than 130 detention camps in Germany for enemies of Hitler. And when you get into the larger camps, people think of Auschwitz as one place. No, it was repurposed Polish army camp first. Again, you want to use buildings that are already there. The Germans are frugal and efficient.
Yeah.
And then in 1942, after the Wannsee Conference, when they came up with the final solution, they realized that Auschwitz is centrally located in Europe. There's water, there's rail lines. It's only 40 kilometers from the German capital, the general government of Krakow, and it became a very logical place, and then it became this huge killing center. It wasn't initially. But Henry just about died in the first 6 weeks of starvation. And obviously, this is not a spoiler alert. He survived the war. Okay, otherwise I would not have met him, so it's not a spoiler alert. Part of the story is what he had to go through, what others had to go through that he had to witness. But Auschwitz, what can I say? You know, there were certain people that might have had, if you spoke German, you had a longer life expectancy, and Henry spoke German.
Okay.
Good enough.
So he could translate somewhat and things like that.
Yeah, he had 5 or 6 years of high school German, so you wouldn't say fluent speaker, but enough to understand and read the signs and follow orders. The Germans, if you didn't understand orders, they beat you up for just being a stupid peasant, when really it was language. Mm-hmm. He went in strong, not that matters, lean and strong. You know, he just about starved. One of the reasons that prison camps, rather than killing people, there's slave labor. Why not get as much use out of them as you can before they starve to death in 4 to 6 weeks? So that was a different philosophy.
Right.
And a lot of people died, torture, execution, starvation disease. And yeah.
You talk about in the book the ovens that he was at. He shoveled coal, if memory serves, or something into some of these ovens. What did he say about that and how he felt about it? Talk about the ovens first, and then how did he feel? I can't even imagine like being in that place. You're needing to do these things to survive, but you must talk about how you feel about it. What did he say? Talk about the ovens.
Henry was very much a matter-of-fact guy. He was not into a lot of description. I wasn't into getting the whole emotional, context like a counselor would be. Historically, so Henry arrives in Auschwitz June 42. In March 43, he was shipped back to Germany to a camp called Buchenwald, which is a lesser-known camp, but if you know your history.
I've heard of it before, yeah.
Yeah, it opened in 1937, and it was a pilot camp. Anyway, he was there for almost 2 years. In the winter of 45, they started... that's when they started evacuating camps. The Russians got to Auschwitz January 27. As the Russians were encroaching, the Germans were evacuating those camps. So there became this surge of prisoners, bodies, everyone invading these camps in Germany. And that's when they really became overcrowded. Well, he had a friend. He was in his barracks, and the Germans came along and said, raus, schnell, schnell, and marched some of the guys to the crematorium. Now, there's a big difference between crematorium and gas chambers. Gas chambers were built to kill. Crematoriums were in every camp because you had to dispose of the dead.
Sure.
And even in Buchenwald, for the first 3 years, they shipped the dead into the city crematorium. They didn't even build one.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. German camps are very different from camps in Poland.
Okay.
Because Germans were pro-Nazi. These were prison camps of undesirables.
Yeah.
The SS lived in town, so it was very different. But they built crematoriums. You had to dispose of the dead. So Henry worked there one night. He was angry when he talked to me. He was disgusted. And actually, what initiated this was he showed me this picture of, and I don't know if you've gotten to it, a stage picture of men feeding a corpse into an oven. And I was like, Henry, where'd you get this? Oh, I got it off a dead soldier. And he kept it somehow. And then he talked about it. But I think you have to understand, when you see death every day, you just become numb. And part of survival is you just get through this day. And then you get through this day. When you're surrounded with that much death, it ceases to shock. Okay, again, it's something that those of us who haven't been there don't get.
Right, we can't.
We can't. Now, he was actually only in the crematorium for one night.
Okay.
But it was enough to describe it. Now, for me to describe it, I visited it. I had to retrace the steps, and this was in Buchenwald. And when I walked into that building, there was such this heavy, moldy atmosphere. I started coughing, Matt. I coughed the entire time I was in this building. I can't explain it. I did not get creeped out at Auschwitz. I knew so much that when I toured Auschwitz, it was with a private guide. I was looking for, if Henry moved from block 24 to over here, really, how far was it? Oh, okay. He said he was here. Well, what did that look like? There was nothing that could shock me because I'd already learned it. When I got to Buchenwald, I needed to learn a little more because Buchenwald and German camps are not as well documented. Auschwitz is the best documented, most famous. The 3 main Holocaust institutions in the world are Yad Vashem in Israel, Auschwitz Memorial, outside Krakow, and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. And
I've
they all
actually
work.
been there twice.
You won't see anything about Poles.
No, you're absolutely correct.
That's right, because the mission of Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Museum, and they have been very helpful to me, but their mission is to memorialize the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust.
Yeah, and not that there's anything wrong with that.
No. One of the powers of this story is to understand that the Holocaust is a subset of World War II history, and it is a subset of what happened in Poland. In fact, even just looking at the German occupation of Poland, that was only half. Germany invaded Poland September 1, 1939. Russia invaded 2 weeks later. And so Henry's story doesn't touch on the whole Stalin piece, but the stories of Stalin were just as awful, just as awful. He evicted 1 million Poles and sent them to Siberia. 500,000 died. I won't even go there.
Yeah.
So back to, the crematorium.
Yeah.
I had to see it, and everything was exactly as Henry described. But it was such a place of death that got to me. It really got to me. And
I can feel that from you right now. I can just see your body language and in your eyes, that emotion that you felt and how it got to you. I can just sense it, see it.
It was one of the last places we went. I didn't need to see crematoriums in Auschwitz. They were way far from the main camp. It wasn't part of Henry's story.
Yeah.
Birkenau, which was Auschwitz too, wasn't part of Henry's story. But that crematorium got to me because Henry told me stories, and stories other people don't know. There was actually a basement in there where they hung people by meat hooks on the ceiling, because that was how they killed in secret. And Henry found that. There was a horrible room built that killed 8,000 Soviet POWs in this same building, in another building, through an insidious way. But that was one of my last parts of that camp, and it was raining. If you're going to visit a concentration camp, Matt, the most real thing is to go when it's cold and drizzly. You go on a sunny, bright summer day, you don't feel it. And October in Poland was cold. Okay. Not near as cold as that one. Anyway, so Buchenwald was at the top of a winding hill. We took a city bus. Camps in Germany don't publicize. Probably Auschwitz gets 1.7 million visitors a year.
Wow. I had no idea it was that many.
Right. You have the memorial, and because more than 1 million people died there, it is become the symbol of the Jewish Holocaust because it was designated. And yes, over 1 million Jews did die there. That was the main thing. So did Poles, so did Soviets, everything else. The majority of Poles died elsewhere. But you don't know that history. Buchenwald was rainy. We left there, and we rode the bus home. And we rode it down to our hotel. And I'll never forget, and this still gets to me. We were sitting on a city bus, and across from us was this blonde girl, beautiful, same age as my daughter. And she had this tote bag, and in block letters, it said, "Whitest boy alive wins."
Oh. Wow.
And I couldn't stop staring to think that that is still now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And I think she felt me staring because she kind of shuffled and moved it. I was like, it's still today.
Wow.
This is Germany. And we got back to my hotel, and I went to the room. I threw my shoes in the trash because they were the ones that walked in the crematorium.
Okay.
I didn't ever want to wear this again.
Yeah.
And I ran a warm bath. And I cried.
Yeah.
Because how was this attitude still today?
Yeah.
That was the hardest part of the trip, because Henry had described it in detail, and because I knew what had happened there. That one got to me. like I say, the rest of the places in Auschwitz, I knew too much. When Henry and I were interviewing, I got this book from my library.
Okay.
And I called it the Photo Album of Auschwitz. And it was Auschwitz in pictures. Now, who else is going to...
So right here in Phoenix?
Yeah, in the Phoenix Lab. Who else checks out a book like that? Yeah. Right? But I'm visual. And Henry is just talking. And so I would take that to our meetings, and he'd look and say, oh, there's my roll wagon. Oh, there's so-and-so. I wonder what happened to him. Oh, Matt.
Wow.
And then, so this was like a photo album of death. I actually got nightmares, but I'm sitting there looking at this photo album with someone who was there.
Yeah.
And it was so worn out that by the time I returned it to the library 6 months later, because again, no one else is checking this book out.
It's not like they're calling you and saying, hey, we need it back. We got a line. There's a line of people here wanting this book. Come on.
Right. So,
Katrina, bring it back.
Right. So when I get to Auschwitz, I didn't need to know, here's this building, here's where the orchestra played, here's this. Yeah,
you knew it already.
I knew it.
Yeah.
And I knew it from someone who was there, so I knew stories otherwise. And I
talked about that in the book too.
Yeah.
About a story that you knew otherwise, that your guide didn't know.
Yeah.
About an SS badge, if I remember
correctly. It was
correctly.
a secret murder plot that had never been documented.
Sure.
Until they found it buried in the archives no one had read. And they're looking at me like this.
He told you this story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But again, I had a high burden of proof. I had to prove this.
Yeah, yeah.
So the best thing that happened was they found this PhD dissertation and someone else described it.
Really?
Down to the names who were there and exactly how it happened, which was slightly different than Henry. And they're looking at me as this American woman out of no place. It's not my family. What am I doing? And Henry knew some prisoner names. So when you go visit a museum, you send requests for information ahead so they can pull them.
Okay.
So when I went into the archives, they had pulled records on Henry and on a couple of his friends, one of whom was very well renowned. I didn't know this. He was just Teddy Piotrkowski.
Okay, and he was Teddy to Henry.
He was Teddy to Henry. He was prisoner number 77. What I hadn't connected, because with Henry I didn't know the prisoner number, as I read more memoirs, they talked about prisoner 77.
Okay.
You didn't have names.
No, right, correct.
There weren't names. The table was stacked high of books and records. And they kind of looked at me. They were surprised that I would know these two prisoners. Mm-hmm. They were friends of Henry's. So, but yes, Auschwitz did not shock me. And someone who goes there the first time would get it. People tell me, oh, I could never go there. I totally respect that. I had to.
Yeah.
I had to.
Yeah.
And I regret only going one day.
Okay.
Because there's so much more I could have seen.
Seen, learned, understood.
Somewhat. I would have seen more. I saw what I needed to.
Okay.
I saw what I needed to. When you enter Auschwitz, or W's sound like V, to the right of the gate, there's a building with probably 14, 15 chimneys. What's the first thing you think of when you think of chimneys?
Yeah, well, certainly not what they are.
It was the kitchen.
Oh, it was the kitchen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's obviously in a place like that, that's not what I thought of. But yeah, you would think of like heat or food or whatever. But
it was the kitchen. And think about this. If you have 22,000 prisoners, as meager as the rations were, that is a big job.
Sure.
And Henry worked in the kitchen. And I learned that early on. Okay, Matt, we're talking one of 50 guys out of 22,000 prisoners. Was he connected? Oh, yes. And this also made this story stand out to me as, by instinct, I knew I'd never meet someone else again. When would I have a chance to meet someone who was really there, like in the books you read in social studies?
Yeah, yeah.
Firsthand.
They still call it social studies today?
I don't know.
Yeah.
My kids are in their 20s.
It was for me, but right.
I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. That's going back to my kids are in my 20s.
Yeah, I don't think they do, but I know what you mean. So let's go to the positive side of things. And the reason that I wanted to speak with you is because I felt like, and I want you to describe this, but I felt like Henry, I mean, he was a happy person, you know, and that he was very inviting to you and things like that. And so
I met Henry when he was 85.
Yeah.
He also made me promise something in this book. He said, don't just write about the bad parts.
Yeah.
He said, that was 3 years of hell.
Yeah.
But I had a decent life. I want that in there.
Yeah.
And so I tell people, first of all, there are places with a sense of humor in the camp. And people don't realize day-to-day life, people had to laugh. Because otherwise the Germans won.
Yes.
Otherwise they won your soul.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of understand that and part of who Henry was. I was fascinated with this type. I've had tragedy in my life. By the time I met Henry, I had lost both my parents and my brother. I actually lost my brother when I was 21 in a car accident, DUI, when I was in college. And my father had health issues, and in my family, excuse me, it wasn't the attitude that Henry had. And I was fascinated with that.
And that's why it's so important. I think that attitude is so, it's so important that everybody has problems. Everybody has tragedies. Everybody has the loss of a job. Everybody has those first world, in our case, problems, right? But so many people stay there. They stay in those issues and problems. Henry didn't.
As I learned he was still resentful.
I think resentful is different than not living a productive life.
Yeah, I can't explain it. I think we are all individuals.
Yeah.
And I think people live differently, react differently.
For sure.
Where was I going with this? I loved being in that atmosphere of love.
Yeah.
And I kind of gleaned onto that. So that was part of being around him, as I liked that atmosphere. And it was a puzzle I kept trying to solve.
Okay.
Because so many survivors have what we now call PTSD.
Yeah.
And the opposite of that is you are committed to witness. So those have been the two main reactions I've seen is you lived, you're going to tell the world, or it is too painful, I'm not talking about it. Mm-hmm. And Henry was different.
Yeah.
Nancy told me later, and I learned more about Henry. I have a note from her, but I remember one time she said, over a glass of wine. We talked all the time over wine, and I'm fine. Give me a glass of Merlot. I'm a happy woman.
Fantastic.
But she said, you know what, Katrina? Henry thought you were just wonderful. Several people through the years offered to write his story.
Okay.
He only said yes to you.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That must, that's got to be a sense of pride there for you.
Yes. And I think part of this story, Henry, it had to have his name. The logliner subtitle, every word means something. It's the true story of a Polish swimmer.
Yeah.
And my mind just went blank. And friendship.
Yeah.
From Auschwitz to America. So as you read it, it's not only the friendship that Henry had, but at the core of it is the friendship Henry and I had.
Yeah.
And that comes through as well. Because again, I wouldn't have done that. No one shows up on your doorstep, Matt, after 1 hour and says, please, can I write your story? Puts in all this work, asks for nothing in return. I didn't even realize how crazy this was. But I have learned, and I think it's a God thing. Henry is a God thing. It put me in the right place. It matched us up. we were a good match. And there were so many times, it was 15 years from the time I met Henry to when it was published. That's a long time.
That is a long time.
There were times I set this aside, family issues, life happens.
Yes.
But I set it aside going, what was I thinking? I'll never do this. And then it would come back. And so then it became this ongoing prayer. Okay, Lord, if I am supposed to do this, just bring the right people into my life. I don't know what to ask for.
Yeah.
Just open doors. And he did again and again and again. I think if I had hit closed doors, I would have gotten the message early on, but it was just a sign that I was meant to do this.
Yeah.
And once it was out, I'm convinced that for whatever reason, in providence, in God's plan, I was the right person at the right time in a way I couldn't understand.
Yeah, and because he had said no to other people and yes to you in that moment.
And I think,
in other words, what I'm saying is it would have been easy for him to tell you no as well, but he was ready and you were right.
And yes, I was the right person at the right time. He was older. He was slowing down physically. Henry was an athlete his whole life.
Yeah.
He swam. He was a killer in tennis. And so he played in Arizona Senior Olympics up until... And I remember meeting people in the community, and I'd say, yeah, I'm interviewing this guy from Poland. Henry? Oh, he's good. No one can beat him. He was well known, you know. And I remember at his funeral, some people said, are you the woman writing that book? Whatever happened? Why didn't you finish that? When are we going to get to read it?
Yeah.
And I felt about this low, guilty, because I didn't have it. Someone read the book early on, a mentor, and she said, Katrina, it's got to have Henry's voice. And ultimately, I went back to the dictation and the transcription. And to the extent I could, it actually is interviewing in his words. Cleaned up. He spoke Polish with a thick accent.
I can imagine. And
when I first sent out a draft, word for word, everything came back, scribbling up the English like, Katrina, I can't believe how bad you write.
Oh, boy.
And I realized it was so bad, it was distracting. So I had to find this balance where it still sounded like him, but I had to clean it up a little bit. But one of the things I hear consistently is you can hear Henry talking. So
totally, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, you can hear him talking. Yeah. I loved it. But what I've gotten to, and I'm going to finish it. It is. I can't wait to finish, quite honestly. In fact, but it's a good thing I actually know how to read. Right.
Yeah.
Normally I listen to books, but I'm really into it so far and reading the different things. But
so I brought something.
Okay.
I haven't shown anyone because I have not done an announcement.
Okay. Really?
This is Henry in Polish.
Wow.
A publisher in Poland found it, bought the rights, and I just got that 2 nights ago.
Oh, wow.
It's now available for sale in Poland and worldwide. There's a UK online seller called Book Depository.
Okay. Yeah, that's. I was just going to say that actually. Let's talk about. I want people to hear stories like Henry's and buy this book, and I think it's so important to not miss these types of stories and not glamorize anything or anyone in particular. But I think that we don't understand how it wasn't just about one focus there. I mean, like you've talked about. And I think we get wrapped up into one focus. And not that we shouldn't get wrapped up into the Jewish focus either, but I think it's important that we don't get wrapped up into just that because it was so broad. It was so evil.
Well, and I have so much respect for my Jewish friends. I have one fellow author. She lost 100 family members in Poland. I don't know 100 people, Matt. I come from a very small family. My dad was in a very small family. So, but that story has been told.
Yeah.
This story has not. It's available for sale.
Yeah, tell us where or what your website or
my website, KatrinaShawver.com.
Yeah,
you've got.
We'll put that on the screen here too for any YouTube watchers.
It doesn't sell through my website. It's available through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Booktopia in Australia, any online bookseller worldwide.
Okay.
Book Depository is cool for people overseas, or the Polish version. You can order any book there. They accept any currency and ship worldwide for free.
Is that right? Wow.
Yes. Amazon is U.S.
Yeah.
There's Amazon German. There's actually 9 Amazons.
Okay.
All this stuff. I had to learn the whole industry.
Yeah, I suppose.
I don't have a second book yet.
Yeah.
And people ask me that.
I'm going to get you to sign this, by the way, please.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right.
Thank you again for buying the book. And I'm glad for anyone else. It is great for book clubs because there's so many discussion points in it. And I love going to book clubs. In fact, I am set up to video conference. I have my microphone and headphone. I video conferenced into a book club in Lake Tahoe. That was really fun.
Cool.
So I will attend book clubs any place. If people are reading my book, absolutely.
They need to reach out to you for sure then.
Yeah, I love talking about it. And my email is on my website, contact form. Available for sale. I'm on Facebook, I'm LinkedIn, and where else was I going with that? Oh, there's a Polish edition out.
Yeah.
I have not announced that publicly because I'm waiting for the right announcement.
Yeah.
And it's also in libraries. I'm a library geek.
Yeah.
And one of the other things, this was a first for my publisher, the Arizona Talking Book Library found it.
Okay.
And they produced it as a talking book. So it's available through the Library of Congress for the visually impaired and physically handicapped any place in the U.S.
Nice.
Which is really proud of me because I actually have a vision impaired son.
Okay.
So isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is. That's fantastic.
And it's available ebook, hardback, paper book. I've had people who check it out and read it and then come back and buy hard books because
you should get it in audio version.
Funny you should say that. I'm researching that at the moment.
Okay.
It's been on my to-do list for like 6 months.
Yeah.
And I was just looking into that 2 days ago.
Audiobooks, that's just my own personal preference.
No, they're the fastest growing part. They're the fastest growing industry. Last year, the sales of audiobooks rose 35%.
Wow.
Just like podcasts.
It's probably like 10% was me, but...
I'll probably
what I bought, that's what I'm saying. Like I love audiobooks.
And actually, I don't have an audiobook, but my ebook is also available through public libraries.
Sure.
Some public libraries. If it isn't in yours, you can always request it.
Yeah.
Audiobooks again are a growing thing. I own the rights, so I have to produce it.
Ah, okay.
So that is why I need to research that. My publisher does foreign rights, print, and whatever else, but I own the audio and film rights. So it's up to me to produce it. And so everything with Henry, it's got to be right. It's got to be quality or I won't do it.
Yeah.
And that's where I am now is researching that.
Yeah.
It's got to be quality.
Yeah.
And that means I got to find someone with an Eastern European accent to narrate.
That would be cool.
It's not just a straightforward,
so cool.
It's required.
Yes.
It's required.
Nice.
So... I don't have a second book yet, and there's not a sequel. Okay, this is one man's story.
Yes,
and as
he didn't
have
kids.
As we talked before, I would love to find another survivor. I've probably met 3 or 4, but for one reason or another, it didn't pan out. Either the story or their circumstances to really talk. And it became... When I really committed to it after Nancy died in 2013, it became I want to publish before I die. I had worked so hard and I knew so much, I didn't want to take this story to the grave.
Yeah.
So once I went to Poland, I threw together a website, threw together a blog, and I started writing and getting it out in public. Because if I died, people had it. And so... I haven't died, which means I'm now creating the next phase, which I've been marketing. And again, this is all while I was working full time.
Sure.
Once I got a publishing contract, I was a paralegal. Before
Okay.
that, I've been a variety of things. My husband let me quit. I asked him for a year. I had bankrolled my salary for a year, knowing this might be coming. And so now I do the book full time.
Nice.
I write and promote the book full time, and that is the only way I can get it out there.
Yeah.
Grassroots.
Well, I hope that this helps get it out there, because Henry's story is fascinating, and I think that it's important that we understand and listen to what he has to say and what you have to say and things in there too. So, Katrina, I thank you for being here today.
Matt, thank you. And I wish you the best with all your podcasts. It's such
Thank
a
you.
wonderful thing you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.